Are you as tired as I am of baked Alaska, chocolate souffle, Charlotte Malakoff, crepe Suzette? Good. I've got just the thing for you. Tarte aux fraises, fresh strawberry tarts. We're doing them next time on The French Chef.
The French Chef is made possible by a grant from Hills Brothers Coffee Incorporated and a grant from the Polaroid Corporation.
This handsome object was just nothing but flour, eggs, sugar, and a few strawberries. It's a wonderful example of what the French can do with simple ingredients when they decide to make a tarte aux fraises. We're doing strawberry tarts today on The French Chef. Welcome to The French Chef. I'm Julia Child. This is a strawberry tart glittering here in front of me. And like so many things, it looks rather too grand to be made by the home cook. But actually, it's nothing but an assembly job. And the first thing on the assembly line is making a pastry shell. And you can make these are fully cooked pastry shells. There's a big one and there's a little one. And these are formed in the classical manner in a tart mold. But you don't have to use any kind of a mold at all to make a beautiful pastry shell. And I thought you'd like to see how to make one when you don't have any appropriate thing around the house, or would you like to make a free-form model. And this one is, you can just take any dough that you like. This one happens to be the same dough that we made for our fruit tarts some time ago. And the proportions for that, if you'd like to write them down, the ingredients are 1½ cups of all-purpose flour and 1 stick or 4 ounces of butter that's chilled, and 3 tablespoons of shortening, and 1/4 teaspoon of salt, 2 tablespoons of sugar, and 1/2 cup of ice water. But you can use a dough mix if you like. So I think a homemade dough is much the nicest thing possible. And with this, we're just rolling it out into a long rectangle. You can make these shells any size or shape you like. I think the long one is rather nice. And then I'm going to put it on a buttered baking sheet. Be sure if you're going to make one, you don't forget to butter the baking sheet, or you'll find you can't get it off after you've baked it. And then you fold up the dough. I'm rolling it about 1/8 to 3/4 of an inch thick. And then spread it out. Then what we're going to do is to make some edges. And to that, I have a little ravioli wheel and just even them off. There's several ways to make these pastry shells. I remember when I said in those proportions for the dough, if I said 1/2 or 1/3 cup of ice water, I meant 1/3 cup of ice water. In other words, you want just enough water in the dough to make it stick together. I'll give you those proportions over again. That's 1½ cup of flour, 1 stick of butter, 3 tablespoons of shortening, 1/4 teaspoon salt, 2 tablespoons of sugar, and 1/3 cup of ice water. It's the same dough we made for the apple tarts. So there, or any dough you want. Then you've evened off the edges, and then take a little brush and dip it in cold water and paint about 1 inch of the border. And then we're going to use this border for the sort of the edges of the tart, and then cut out a little piece on the side. You'll see why as I start rolling them up. I think these free forms are fun because then you can do anything you want with them. And then just fold the side over on itself. This is going to make just a very narrow edge here. You can roll it if you want. You cannot, if you're going to make one of these shells, you can't use it for a deep kind of a tart, but it works very nicely for a strawberry tart. You can roll it over twice if you like to make it a little bit deeper, but it always sinks down a bit as it's cooked. And then take a fork and push it together on the sides. And be sure you don't forget to put the water on the dough before you roll it, because that seals the edges down. And then push it down again with a fork all the way around. And this is also sealing the edges, and then prick with the fork all along. And this pricking down of the bottom keeps it from rising when it's in the oven. I don't think it's a bad idea after you have rolled it out and pricked it and formed it to then put it in the refrigerator, but in this case I'll put it right in the oven. And this goes into a 425 degree oven and bakes for about 20 minutes, because this is supposed to be a fully baked shell. And then when it comes out and is baked, it looks just like this. Isn't that nice? You see the edges have stayed up very nicely. And then once you have your shell made, whether it's a little baby shell or the big shell or this kind of a shell, you're then ready to put your strawberries on. But when you do put them on, they always exude a little bit of juice. So before you use the shell for the tart, you will have to waterproof it. That always sounds rather funny, waterproofing a pastry shell. But this is what the French call an apricot glaze that we're going to make. And you take regular apricot jam and you have to sieve it, because all the apricot jam has the peel in it. And so we just sieve it, and I'm going to put this right over heat because this is going to be cooked down to be made rather thick. You know, when you're boiling sugar, this is the same idea as boiling sugar, in that the longer you boil it, the sugar goes through various stages of, like the thread and the soft ball and so forth. And we're just going to boil this up to the stage that's 228 degrees. And the reason you do that is because you want the glaze to be not sticky when it cools, and then it acts as a waterproofing, and then also to aid in the thickening up of it. For each cup of apricot jam, put in 2 tablespoons of sugar. And you French, you can use either apricot jam or red currant. Though some people like to use red currant jam with strawberries, I like the taste of apricot very much, but you can use either one, and if you use the red currant, you wouldn't have to sieve it. Then you just want to let that boil, and then you can tell when it's done, when you lift up the spoon and the last drops come off very slowly from the spoon, and it's thickened up, and also it will clear a little bit. It's a slightly sort of muddy or a cloudy color at this time. It just takes about a minute or 2 of boiling over high heat. And once you've made it, you can just put it back in the original jar, and it'll keep for an awfully long time. Then you can just use it again. So as long as you're making it, you might as well make a little bit more than you think you're going to use. That's bubbling up nicely and hasn't quite cleared. And you just keep right on stirring it. I don't know what the French would do if they didn't have apricot jam. I think we've used it on all kinds of things, but I don't remember whether we've actually boiled it. So you just keep on boiling it, and then, I'm not sure that this is it, but I have this ready glaze that I started out with here. And you boil it until, when you lift the spoon up, just take your fingers, you have to wet your fingers in your mouth, and then take a little bit of it and you lift. See that sort of forming a thread, and that means it's done and ready. Well, you want to taste it and see if it's any good. And then you're ready to waterproof your shells. I'm going to waterproof some of these little baby shells. And you just take the glaze and paint it on. And this acts as a very nice waterproofing because you don't want your shells to become soggy and sort of gooey. And this prevents them from doing so. And here we will paint our big free-form shell. The waterproofing also means that you can fill your tart sometime beforehand, and then it won't, and your shell will still stay nice the way it should. And be sure you remember to use the glaze when it's warm, because when it cools off, you can't, it won't spread, so you just heat it up a little bit. There, now that's all glazed and ready to go. And now, the simplest way to do a strawberry tart, I'll just show you on these little baby ones, is just to take the strawberries, and you have your little tartlet shells all glazed, and just put the strawberries in, like that. And then you put some more of your apricot glaze on top. And in this case, you just take a spoon and just drip a little of the strawberry on top, and that makes them glitter nicely. And these are very nice served with lightly whipped cream, crème chantilly, and you can use them with tea, and they're very pretty indeed. But you can be a little more fancy than that, and you can make what is known as a pastry cream and serve that in your tart. And I think that is one of the nicest ways of doing it. You line the tart with the pastry cream, and then you put the strawberries on, and then glaze the top of them. And we're going to make a French pastry cream, or crème pâtissière. And so I'm going to heat up 2 cups of milk. We're going to make about 2½ cups of crème pâtissière. And then we're going to make the custard mixture, which the crème pâtissière consists of. And for that, we're going to use 6 egg yolks. And I'm going to make this in a mixer. I don't know why. I just had my old mixer around. I thought, well, I might as well use it for something. You can do it either by hand or in the mixer. So there are 6 egg yolks. And then we want to gradually beat in 1 cup of granulated sugar. Remember, whenever you're beating sugar into egg yolks, that you beat the sugar in gradually. I'm not even using the regular mixing bowl on this old mixer because I lost it a long time ago. I find it seems to fit any kind of a bowl. See, I'm gradually putting in the sugar. And then we have to beat it until it is thick and pale. You're always seeing that in a recipe. Beat the eggs and sugar until the mixture is pale yellow and forms the ribbon. You can already see that it's beginning to turn a bit pale, and it's thickening nicely. Sometimes it's called lemon yellow. Well, there is certainly quite a difference between the raw yolks. And the reason that you beat the yolks and sugar together is that it seems to, because this sauce is going to be heated, and it seems to keep the egg yolks from curdling if they're beaten up. Now we'll stop this and see if we have a ribbon here. Just notice how this is falling off the beater and forming a ribbon on the surface of the mixture. That means that it is forming the ribbon, so now we can add our hot milk. And again, if you didn't get those ingredients, that was 6 egg yolks and and 1 cup of sugar. And then I forgot to put in, we're going to put in 1/2 cup of all-purpose flour, and I'm using this granular instant flour. And that's going to be the thickening, and that just gets beaten up along with it, with the egg yolks and sugar. That was 1/2 cup of flour, either the granular or the regular all-purpose. And then the milk, which is hot, 2 cups of hot milk. And then that gets beaten in very gradually. And remember again when you're adding anything hot to egg yolks, because they're such delicate things, you have to add the hot liquid very gradually. Otherwise, you will scramble the egg yolks. I'll do that a little faster now. Now that's to get nicely mixed up. I really think this is easier to do by hand, because you just use a big wire whip and a big mixing bowl, and then you don't have, or you can just use a clean saucepan, then you'll have a little bit less to clean. I could have beat this all up by hand in this saucepan here, but anyway, I didn't. Now at this step, all this part is very easy. Just remember that you add the sugar gradually and that you add the hot milk gradually, and then you won't have any trouble. But now we're going to cook this cream, and it goes into a clean saucepan, and make sure you've got a heavy-bottomed saucepan here, because you can run into scorchy troubles if you don't have a clean pan. And set it over heat and just stir it. And the trouble that you may run into here is that if you're not very careful, you can scorch the bottom of your cream, because you've got egg yolks and you have sugar, and that's a very scorchy mixture. So keep stirring it, and be sure that you stir all over the bottom of the pan continually, and be sure that you have the right kind of a pan. I'm using here a pan with stainless. There's a stainless interior, and it has an aluminum exterior. But be sure that you have a pan with a heavy bottom, like a heavy copper on the bottom or heavy cast aluminum. And I'm going to take it sort of on and off heat a little bit, and we have to cook this until it comes up to the boil. Now this pastry cream is called crème pâtissière, and it's used not only for fruit tarts, but it's used for any kind of a filling where you want sort of a creamy, thick custard. For instance, for cream puffs, you could beat chocolate into it and then use it as a cream puff filling, or you could put in whipped cream if you wanted into it when it gets done. And now I'm going to put this on another burner, I think, over here. Now we're beginning to come to the difficult area. You can notice that there's a little steam coming up now, and it means that it's almost coming to the boil. And you note that you're stirring all the time. You're coming around the bottom and the sides of the pan. And now it's beginning to thicken up, and at this point also it begins to get lumpy. So just beat it with your wire whip. And don't worry if it gets lumpy, because if you keep beating it, it will smooth out. You see, now it's beginning to get nice and thick. And this is the part where you want to watch very, very carefully that you don't burn the bottom. You see, that's getting thicker and thicker. And then, see, there are not any lumps in it now. And now you want to turn your heat down to fairly moderate, and you want to cook it for about 2 or 3 minutes, stirring constantly. And the reason for this is this will thicken it up, and it will also cook your flour thoroughly. But this is the part you want to be terribly careful that you don't scorch the bottom of the pan. And if when you're stirring it you see any little brown specks, immediately take it off heat and put it in another pan. Because once you get the brown specks all through, there isn't anything you can do. Now you notice now that's really very, very thick. So at this point you just keep on stirring. Another thing you can do with this pastry cream is you can make a very simple dessert out of it by folding in some stiffly beaten egg whites and then getting some rum soaked sponge cake. You can use stale sponge cake, and then just folding it in with this pastry cream and the beaten egg whites, and that makes an extremely nice dessert. Now you see is very thick, and now this is cooked enough, and you are ready to flavor it up. It's always interesting, I think, that if you start tasting it. Now you taste it now, and this really has nothing in it but the eggs, sugar, flour, and milk. It's very nice, but it doesn't have very much interest to it. So you can put in some vanilla, and you can use either all vanilla, or you can use some vanilla and some liqueur. So I'll put in a big teaspoon of vanilla, and then I'll put in some rum, or you could use Kirsch or Cointreau, and I'll put in about a tablespoon and a half of rum. Now when you're adding the liqueur, you want to be careful not to put in too much, or you'll thin out your pastry cream, because you want this for these fruit tarts to be thick. So be careful and don't be too slap happy with that. And I'll taste it again with this little flavoring in and see what we got. Well, it's much better, but still lacks something, and that something is butter. So put in 2 tablespoons of butter into this hot cream, and then we'll taste it again, and you're just going to see when you do it yourself, it is the most amazing difference that the butter makes. It just gives that sort of French, je ne sais quoi, and whatever else it is. It's just lovely. Now that really tastes the way it is, and it was just the butter that did that. And now we're going to use it for strawberry tarts, so we want to chill it. And if you're going to chill it, you want to clean the sides of the pan off. And if you're going to do it hot, if you're going to serve it hot and you want to do it ahead, you'd film it with a little more butter, but we're going to do it cold, so you'd film it either with a little milk, or I don't have any milk left, so I'll just film it with a tiny bit of rum. I didn't put in as much as I could have put in. And just pour that over the top, and this is to keep the top of the sauce from crusting over. And then as soon as you've done that, you chill it in the refrigerator. I've got some in here that's already chilled. And it thickens up a little more when it's chilled. And so now we have, our assembly is complete, because we have strawberries and we have our shells, and we'll use this free form shell and spread a layer of the pastry cream in. Now another thing is, when you're using this pastry cream, you see it's fairly thick, but it's not terribly thick. And don't think just to be fancy that you should add a very thick layer of cream, whether you're using a free-form shell like this or the round shell like this. Don't put in more than a half-inch layer, or when you cut the tart, all the pastry cream will flow out of it. And now I've got my strawberries here. And see, we're not using all the pastry cream I have there, and any that you have left over will keep for 2 or 3 days, or you can freeze it, which is very nice, because then as soon as you thaw it out, it's ready to use. And it's very nice to have it on hand, because you can make so many simple, nice desserts with this. And you see the strawberries are sitting in the cream, and they're just a little cream on their feet. This really makes a very pretty dessert, I think. And if you're using a round tart, you'd start in the middle with the very largest strawberries, and then arrange them in sort of a long spiral all the way around. You want to see, I'm putting the strawberries very closely together there. And then you put your glaze on top. And I think it's best not to do the tart too far ahead of time, however, because the strawberries can wilt a little bit. However, about half an hour ahead, but you can, if you have to, you can fill it more ahead. But I think about half an hour is about right. But if you do fill it ahead, then put it in the refrigerator. You don't need any sugar on the strawberries because the glaze is sugary. And you can see how necessary it is to have the glaze, because if you don't have this lovely glitter, which I think is part of the beauty of the fruit tart. And then I'd like to cover up the crème pâtissière so that it looks as though we're all made out of glaze. Of course, if you use the red currant, which you would make in exactly the same way, everything would be red, which I think is a little dull. And besides, I don't like the flavor of the red currant as well as I do the apricot. And if you were doing the little tiny shells, I seem to have taken them all away. I've got one over here. You would do it exactly the same way. Put in a little layer, and then put in your strawberries and put on the glaze in exactly the same way. So, there you are. And this is now ready to serve. And I've got a little bit of glaze on the board. So, I'll take this into the dining room so you see how it looks. We're really having a strawberry tart festival here with the long free-form shape and our little tiny ones and then a traditional round one. And I also have a hexagonal shape. And I'm going to cut one so that you can see how it looks. The lovely thing about this pastry cream is that it makes a complete dessert so that you don't have to have any whipped cream or anything else along with it. So, there it is, and you see, having been careful not to put too much pastry cream in, it serves perfectly well, and the cream doesn't dribble off at all. Now, I think this strawberry tart is lovely for dessert, or you could use it, say, if you had to have a meeting or a gathering and you wanted to serve people coffee. You could have it for that, or you could have champagne with it. So next time you happen to be out in a swell restaurant and the waiter comes by with a great big cart of French pastries and your friends say, "Oh, look at those beautiful strawberry tarts," you can say, "Oh, well, strawberry tarts, that's not much of a trick. It's just an assembly job." So that's all for today on The French Chef. This is Julia Child. Bon appétit.